Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Torn Walker TV. I am Torn Walker. Thank you for taking time out of your Thursday evening to listen to me and chop it up and come through. If you're listening, smash up the like button, show everybody some love, let everybody know you're watching the stream, and let's get right into it. On March 30th, the New York Times published an article outlining the enrollment gender gap at Black colleges. The data showed that at some HBCUs, the female to male enrollment ratio is 4-1. Once the study was published, the conversation online moved into discussion about the alleged Black male lack of intelligence. And unfortunately, the majority of this rhetoric came from Black people in higher education. I wanted to have a discussion about this with some people who are positioned to see the absence of this Black men or this dearth of Black men in the academy up close. So I wanted to invite brothers Martin X and also Dr. Tony Gaskew. Professor Tony Gaskew is professional criminal justice at the University of Pittsburgh, and Martin X Henson is a writer, advocate for Black men, and the executive director of the B-Man Foundation. So brothers, how y'all doing tonight?
Fantastic. Great to be here.
Happy to be here as well.
Yeah, good to have you brothers back on the show, man. So let's get right into it. I'll start with you, Dr. Tony. How did we get here? How did we get to this point?
You know, it doesn't take long. Anyone who peruses Carter Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro already has a jump on this. Look, it's universities across the country are hostile territory for Black men. And that's no secret. You know, we can make excuses, we can pull punches. It's a very difficult place for Black men to simply be themselves. And because of it, it generates a tremendous amount of rhetoric, both in the academy and outside the academy. So it's a multifaceted answer.
All right. Martin, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't even plan on getting into it. I just came across it on Twitter, and the discourse lasted long enough to let me know of something significant. But yeah, I see my role as someone who's there to translate the workings of anti-Black misandry into something that Black men who are watching it can understand and feel like they have a voice speaking for them. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Well, Dr. Tony, let me go back to you real quick because you said it's a multifaceted issue, and I agree with you. Can you break down some of the issues and some of the multifaceted issues that you said that got us to this point where Black males Black men are being lapped in the academy almost at a 5-to-1 ratio by Black women? How did we get here? What's keeping them out of this, out of the academy in the first place?
Well, listen, we know there's socioeconomic considerations to get into a university. They're not free, and it's nobody wants to walk into a lifetime of student loan debt. I mean, this is just simply common sense. And you know, you need a sense of community support sometimes to go to college because, you know, as a first-generation college graduate myself, it can be a tricky terrain just to walk into a university. And so you're going to need community support. And historically, Black men and boys haven't really received that community support and that encouragement to go to college. And then once they get on a college campus or a university, many discover that it's a completely different world. And you know, I keep repeating the sense of it can be hostile. It can be hostile based on the culture of a campus, which we all know the data. A little less than 5% of faculty at universities are Black. You know, maybe about 2% Black males, maybe a little closer to 3% Black females. And so you walk into a world where you feel that you're not welcome. And remember, you know, universities, they can be rigorous. So you walk into that culture and you're not quite ready for it, you can be disappointed very quickly.
Martin, what have you seen? Because your work is with Black men and black boys. What kind of conversations have you been having with black boys who may feel discouraged about going to college, or it may not even be an option? What have you seen?
Well, most of the conversations I'm having are with black men navigating this in professional spaces, and trying to understand how this sort of rhetoric is so common. And particularly, I think the dissonance between what we say we want to be able to believe about black people, and the allowed positions and the racial framings or misandric framings of black men, like those interactions are what I'm finding that black men are having a hard time understanding, especially the men who are showing up in ways that are prescribed as successful. That's what I'm seeing.
Can you go into that a little bit more? Because I'm curious about that. You talked about the misandric framing of some of these narratives. What have you seen? And can you explain for the people who are listening exactly what you mean by misandry and anti-black misandry?
Yeah. So today, I also want to let y'all know I wrote about this. Everything I'm saying here, I put into a paper that I published through Medium, talking about the nature of this conversation and the way that I framed it, the curiosity, like where are the black men in college? And I subtitled it, let's have the conversation that people are really trying to have, the things that they're trying to make covert. So when you say anti-black misandry, the simplest way I can describe it is racism that is specifically focused on black men. And because we talk about racism in a general sense, it really obscures the way that we understand the specific nature that is targeted on black men. So my understanding of racism is that it's inherently misandry, like it's focused on men, outgroup men in a colonial system. And for men and people who are watching these conversations and these online debates and positions, you see, as I talk about in the article, this distinction between intersectionality, which we were taught is supposed to include everyone. And then when it's time to talk about black men, you start to get into moral failings as an argument, or they're not motivated enough. So really looking at racism from a position of misandry or anti-black misandry helps you understand what's the difference that's occurring there.
Dr. Tony, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because as somebody who's in the academy and somebody who is dealing with some of the things we're talking about tonight, like black boys either being pushed out of the academy or not even being tracked to go into the academy. One of the things that you hear a lot, and you hear this from people who work inside the academy and some who have gone through it, is that the academy is not a welcoming place for a lot of black men. And unfortunately, a lot of that hostility and a lot of that welcoming is coming from people who look like us sometimes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Martin touched on a perfect point. This anti-black misandric ideology it's sometimes built into the curriculum of a university. I mean, literally. And again, always trying to support this with some sort of empirical data. We know that there's not a large percentage of black faculty who are in the STEM fields. And in most universities, they have this liberal arts framing, which forces almost every student to take courses in history, philosophy. And what you're going to see today in universities, you're going to see built into that curriculum issues of gender studies, sometimes black studies. And let me just tell you, those specific academic disciplines, or what many people look at as ideologies, are not black male friendly, to say the least. In trying to navigate that as a student, as a faculty member, as a staff member at a university, it can be challenging. But to try to navigate that when you're 18 to 23 years old can almost be impossible when it's embedded into the curriculum.
Well, how did we get to this point? I mean, how did we get to the place where black children, black kids going into college, going into higher education, it almost seems like the way you're describing it, it's like they almost get deflected from getting any sort of like affirming education that affirms them, even though you have to have academic rigor. But it seems like there's almost a system in place that completely break down their psyche and break them down to the point where there's no idea of who they are. There's no affirmation of what they are, especially when it comes to black men. It's almost like you're seen as pathological before you even get to be able to sit down in the classroom. And once you get there, a lot of the methodology seems to reinforce that mindset. Am I wrong or not?
No, you listen, again, growing up in inner city Chicago myself, I never even had a discussion about feminism until I got to the university. And once you're at the university, you're bombarded with somebody else's ideology. And again, think of it as a student. If you don't accept your faculty member or your professor's ideology, you then feel less important. You feel as though it jeopardizes your grade, your standing, your intellectualism on campus. So, and again, not saying that some of those conversations don't happen in the street, but in the academy, it's almost married to a person's identity. And listen, if you really want to understand this war on black men at the post-secondary level, you have to understand, again, the role the academy plays, and specifically the academic disciplines of gender studies and black studies. Both are culpable in pushing back black men from successfully completing their academic journeys. Because listen, factually, both of them have a long CIA DNA history as far as their funding is concerned. The Ford Foundation has uplifted both of those disciplines to hundreds of millions of dollars to sell their own personal agenda. Again, as I said, that's been integrated into the curriculum. And if you think about it, gender studies and black studies on university campuses, they're interchangeable. That is, they give the same ideological message. They're taught and led by the same faculty. Neither, and unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to say this, neither of those disciplines is considered a science. They're not considered empirically based. They're simply considered liberal ideologies. And when you try to force a student into that, there's going to be pushback. And it's much easier to leave a campus than to change who you are as a person.
Okay. I want to bring up another thing that I feel like people haven't really been addressing in the discourse around this article. I'm going to put some data up on the screen so people can see for themselves. The conversation is kind of fed into this idea that black men are either being excluded from campuses or they're not qualified enough to be on college campuses. But I just want to put this up for everybody. If you look at the graph here, this is from Pew Research. Across the board in the United States, there is a significant disconnect and significant drop between enrollment for females and enrollment for males. The share of 18 to 24-year-olds enrolled in higher education by sex and race in 2022, it is lower for white males, black males, Latino males, Asian males, surprisingly, and even Native American males. So this is not something that's specifically inherent to black males, but the way it's being portrayed is that there's some sort of deficiency in black males that's making them not be able to either matriculate into college or complete college. So my question to you, and I want to throw this out to both of y'all, is how do we get to the point from talking about the fact that there is a significant drop in male attendance in college across the board to saying that black males are somehow either not qualified to attend college or there's some sort of special case? And I'll throw this to Martin and I'll go back to Dr. Tony.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's all a part of their school to prison pipeline that we've known existed for a long time. That is basically erasing black men from the social and educational market. And when it's time to discuss the impacts of these, again, it moves back to this discussion of black men having personal or moral failings that prevent them from being able to move to the next level. So there's a sort of systemic bias that's unique to black men, which is why we call it anti-black misandry instead of racism, to where social problems, once they begin to move into the forefront of society, the sort of colonial focus begins to look toward outgroup men, specifically racialized men and specifically black men, to be able to give reasons for why to put this on us, so it can't be seen as a function of the system's inefficiency. So black men are the first to be blamed, while we're also the first to be excluded, even before we even reach manhood. So that's the thing that we're seeing, and it's hard for men who already know that this is happening, and the people who have studied the data, because the data is out there, to have to continually have these conversations uh, that focus on our deviancy.
Dr. Tony, same question. How do we get from having this conversation that could be a conversation that's all encompassing across the board, across racial lines, into this you black men just aren't smart enough to get into college, which is what it's turned into?
You know, misrepresenting these caricatures on black men and boys is simply socially and culturally acceptable. I mean, this is part of the diaspora in America, and the pushback is extremely difficult, because if you don't have representation in the academy to disperse those facts, and listen, the academy is big business. This is no secret to anyone. Education isn't free today, and if the education and the curriculum is based on misrepresenting black males, everyone's going to join a board. If funding is available, that's not going to push back on mischaracterizations of black men and boys. It's never going to happen. So this is what black men and boys breathe every single day. And listen, it's a challenge not to accept some of that as truth. If you hear a lie long enough, sometimes you're simply going to look in the mirror, and through self-reflection, you may just say, that maybe that is me. And 400 plus years of that, it's starting to take its toll. But it's very easy to misrepresent facts when you're pointing the finger at black males and black boys.
All right. I want to stay on that for a second, because another issue that I see in that is taking this data as it is just by itself. A lot of times when we have these conversations, we don't get into the context of why things are the way they are. We say this is something that's static, that just happened overnight, but we don't get into the details of how this happened. And I want to put up another stat for everybody to look at. This is from Brookings Institute. This is high school completion rates and high school graduation rates. And you see some of the same patterns emerging. You see white girls tend to graduate high school more than white boys. Hispanic and black girls tend to graduate high school more than black boys. And Asian girls tend to graduate high school more than Asian boys. And again, I'm going to bring this back to it. This is something that you see. This is a phenomenon that is deeper than just black boys. This is a failure of men and failure of men in the United States as far as education. And instead of addressing this as a failure of education for men in general, again, we fall back into these stereotypes. We fall back into these tropes that, unfortunately, I've seen a lot of black people who work in counseling and work in other fields that are directly responsible for the well-being of black boys, saying, well, y'all just aren't qualified to graduate high school or finish college. There's something deficient with you. There's nothing deficient with the system. And I think that's really fascinating. So Martin, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the system is designed to, it's not designed for our benefit. So when people are not moving and advancing in ways that suggest that their success is built into what the outcome that is looking for, then we get this. So moving into the mental health and social work framework, and thinking about how our systems of health acknowledge the realities of black men and boys. They often are coming from philosophies that don't even account for race. Philosophies that initially framed black people, black men, as deficient and backward, filled with eugenicists and all of these people that built their practices by working with white people sitting on a couch, pondering dreams. But when it's time to think about real world practices of health and public awareness of different things happening in communities, there's not much language on that. So, which is why I do the work that I do with my foundation, the Men Foundation. Our organization does support spaces once a month, every second Sunday, to be able to meet the middle of that gap that people are not being finding when they go to schools or when they're looking for mental health providers in communities or psychiatrists that they feel like can be supportive. It's not enough of us. And when you get there, you can't afford it. So mental health largely is a middle class endeavor when I describe it, because who's going to have insurance, especially in the next coming years? And then going into the higher education realm, who's going to be able to afford college when we're not getting our costs subsidized anymore? So we're in for a really hard time considering the state of our country in this moment.
Um, Dr. Tony, over to you. This idea that instead of having this conversation about, lower expectancies and outcomes for men across the board, we get into this conversation where you have people who look like you and you have people who should know better, you would think, saying they only focus on the deficiencies of black males. And I'm not talking about internal deficiencies. I'm talking about the way the system sets it up for black men to fail, pretty much. Instead of addressing the systemic issues that are affecting black men, it automatically falls back onto the individual. And I think that's kind of disheartening. And I think that's very dangerous for somebody who is in the field like therapy, or somebody who's in the legal profession, or somebody who's in education, to say these things. But you can say this stuff about black men, but you can't say that about anybody else, and people let it rock and there's no pushback.
No, and listen, I don't think you can expect a different outcome with 40 years of this agenda. I mean, again, I keep going back to a platform where if you're placed in an environment that looks at you as a beast of burden, and this could be any man. This may not be racially inclined. If you're placed in an environment where you're forced to accept someone else's ideology of who you are and how you identify. I mean, if you even self-identify as an alpha personality in higher education, you're immediately looked at as someone who's a troublemaker, somebody who's a revolutionary, someone who is anti-women. I mean, you're labeled with all these negative factors as a male. And if you walk into that environment as a black male, I mean, literally, I've seen black male students on campus when they walk past someone of a different race, sometimes their head even bows down. I mean, it's an incredible phenomenon to see that you're almost pacified as a male. And again, that's an extremely uncomfortable environment to be in. And it's much easier to avoid that environment than to accept it and change yourself.
Well, that's really disheartening to me, because how do you get to the point where you have people who are trying to go somewhere to educate themselves and get a higher education, and then every place you go, you're looking for people who look like you? Because we got to remember, this study and this article was about the lack of black men at HBCUs. And the whole selling point of HBCUs is that this is somewhere that black people in general can come and you can find a, intellectual home. You can find a cohort. You can find people who look like you that you can build with. And if black boys are moving into these spaces, the few that get into there, and this is what they're dealing with, then what does that say about the larger culture that we live in if you can't even find a home and find a safe space amongst your own people when you're already seen as being demonized? Martin, I'll throw this to you.
Yeah, it's difficult when you don't have a home in the places that you're going to, and I think part of it that we have to think about are the different ideological commitments to the framings and understanding of black men that you're walking into, that you can see when you're going into a corporate environment, or if you see it in a higher education environment, or even in middle school and elementary, where your actions and the outcomes of your behavior are always seen as something that you need to overcome. And seeing other members of your race or other marginalized identities being treated as if they don't have this internal disposition or expectation that because they're male, they're going to be less than. So, I mean, I think a lot about racial battle fatigue. I think a lot about John Henryism for And just to define that,
can you explain that a little bit? John Henryism, because I know we talk about that a lot. Can you explain what John Henryism is?
Yeah, it's this idea that you have to be strong and stoic and endure any sort of trial that comes your way. Uh, and when I think about the health outcomes of Black men, men that may die early or without the proper care, those men have to bear the burdens of this misandric focus on society that demands that they are masculine enough. You know, a positive view of masculinity for a Black community is that we want to take care of everybody and we want everybody to be okay. We want to hold the stress of our family and community, and the burden of never being seen positively and the emotional stress and weight of, I think, directly contributes to men dying early, Black men dying early of stress-related diseases and medical problems.
Tony, did you want to add to this?
Yeah, just very quickly. You know, I'm always fascinated by this mythology of HBCUs. When have HBCUs been Black male friendly? Is this a phenomenon that has taken place the last 60 years that we're not aware of? I mean, let's think about this. The New York City Police Department's annual budget is bigger than the endowments of all 100+ HBCUs put together. When I think of HBCUs, and don't get me wrong, there's clearly HBCUs have generated fantastic Black scholars over the last century. So that's not in dispute. But what is in dispute is this methodology that surrounds it. Most HBCUs are in horrific economic standing. And because, and I want to make this very clear, because white money creates Black power at HBCUs. And I think that's well known throughout the entire academy. Again, maybe that's for another show, but I'm always fascinated when I hear this mythology of HBCUs.
Well, what exactly about it that you have an issue with it that you don't really believe in? Is it the idea that they're always supposed to be welcoming, or is it sort of like that different world mythology that was on TV that everybody got sold, and that's not the case?
No, I'm at a primary white institution. It's clear where the money's coming from. At HBCUs, their primary white institutions run financially. This is what I mean. So it's amazing to hear. I think most people think when they think HBCUs that it's like a Black-owned business, and that is clearly not the case.
I got you. It's actually kind of funny you mentioned that, because the next part of the conversation we're going to get into is about the outreach that's being done to bring Black boys in, but I'm going to table that for right now. I want to get into another part of this conversation, and I'm going to put one more slide up before we get into this. 1 second. This is another. Hang on 1 second. This is from Black Demographics. This is a breakdown of Black millennial salary distribution by gender and marital status. You may not be able to see it because of the crawl, but this is from the U.S. Census Bureau. It shows that married Black men and married Black women making over $100,000 tend to be with each other. It also shows that single Black men and single Black women that are making over 100 or making over $1 million, they either tend to be with each other or they tend to be single. Another part of this is sort of a side part of this conversation, but another part of the conversation that's been going on is that this idea that if you have a college degree and once you become successful, then you automatically go out and try to find a mate that way, when the data shows that's not the case. 83% of Black men are married to Black women, and 93% of Black women are married to Black men who are making over $100,000. And I think that's sort of like a hidden stressor in some of this conversation, because a lot of this idea that Black men are trying to get away from each other, or Black men are not going to college, is because people who want to see them as somebody who might be potentially marriageable are not finding them. And a lot of that might be compensating for the fact that they are not finding people to eventually mate with, like other populations do when they go to college. And this is just something that's based in mythology, like you said, and not real data. Dr. Tony?
No, and again, usually with that, the data speaks for itself. It's tough that we have to continue to reiterate and regurgitate those facts. Clearly, college campuses are environments where everyone gets to explore who they are and who the other person is. There's no doubt about it. And sometimes that's the attraction of a university setting. But at the end of the day, individuals who obtain college degrees, whether it's at the bachelor or the master's or PhD level, when it comes to economics, most people try to stay home for economics and stay within their cultural comfortability. But again, it's very difficult when you have to always present data to deflect, misinformation, and that's always clearly one of them.
All right. Martin, let me ask you, because another part of this conversation has been sort of like this trend. And even though I know, Dave Chappelle said social media isn't a real place, but unfortunately there are real people on there. And we have to get into this conversation. Some of what I saw was sort of like this narrative that was shaping up around this conversation about, I call it black male deficiency theory. And it's sort of like this idea that the reason black men aren't achieving and the reason they're not in college and the reason some of them are not making high salaries is because of some inherent deficiency in black men themselves, and not the deficiency in the system that puts them in a position to not be able to go to college and not be able to take care of their families and that sort of thing. And again, the part of this that disturbs me is the fact that so many people who consider themselves scholars, if I may call it such, or people who are using their government name and they have like 4 or 5 letters behind their names, they're clinical social workers. They're people who are in a position to affect the lives of black boys are saying this stuff. And as somebody who works with black boys, I'd love to get your thoughts on what you think about that, because I think it's very dangerous.
Yeah, it is dangerous because, well, the thing that you have to think about and make room for is, social media is a big echo chamber, and it's even worse since Musk have taken over and got a hold of Twitter. And what it does is reinforce and give people an excuse to kind of live in confirmation bias, where they can pump up the positions that give them the most value. So I wrote about this in my article. In terms of social and sort of conventional views about black men, they're always negative, right? And black men are having to navigate that. But in liberal or progressive circles, there is a trend or a way to show value to women is to say that they have to navigate the world in the regular black way and navigate being a woman as well. And most of the times, or many times, these conversations will begin to absorb themselves into a sort of misandric lens that will say, well, women have all the things that black men navigate and are still able to be successful. Because when people are positioned in a way where they have to say, look at let's say what's happening in higher education and see that the levels between black men and black women aren't in parity, they're forced to choose between one of two narratives. One of them is that either black men are having greater barriers to advancement, or black women are more successful and black men are lazy. And because of the nature of racism, specifically racism kind of having a misandric focus, meaning that it leans on men for it to generalize its ideas, people generally lean to, well, the men are lazy, because it gives them a position where they can also uplift the women too. So it puts white supremacy puts us in these binds, right? Where black women are oftentimes navigating being invisible, and the way that they can gain greater visibility is to say, well, we're doing better than the men. We're the model minority here. And then black men are looking at this and saying like, hey, we were just talking about racism in Black Lives Matter movement, right? And structural oppression. How do the rules not apply now? So this is what people are struggling with when they see this discourse online.
I got you. Just to do a little bit of house cleaning real quick. If you're just watching, this is Torrin Walker TV. Thanks for everybody for coming through. If you want to support the channel, check the scroll. You can support via Cash App, PayPal, Venmo, and also on Zelle. I want to play a video real quick so people can get an idea of what we're talking about, just to go just how deep this rabbit hole is when we're talking about the demonization of black boys and this sort of like unfair unfair struggle they're having to put through. I'm going to play this real quick, and then I want to get both your brothers' thoughts on what you see.
In 2016, researchers at Yale showed teachers this video clip of 4 preschool students. Their instructions: look for misbehavior and click when you see it. The study was kind of deceptive. None of the kids in the video actually misbehaved. The researchers were using eye tracking software. What they actually wanted to study was who the teachers were watching. Both Black and white teachers spent significantly more time watching the Black boy in the video. This study showed that even preschool teachers can treat kids differently based on their race without even realizing it. Look elsewhere in the US school system and you'll see this show up in other ways, like at this middle school in Bryan, Texas. They gave students tickets for offenses like disrupting class or using profanity. Black students were 4 times more likely than white students to receive those tickets. Nationwide, Black boys miss way more school due to suspensions than any other group. And this can start a kind of chain reaction. Missing weeks of school due to suspensions makes students much more likely to drop out. Without a diploma, you're much less likely to earn a living wage and much more likely to be incarcerated. All this missing school is helping to drive the highest poverty and incarceration rates in the developed world. So it's worth asking, how'd we get here?
So, Dr. Tony, what are your thoughts? That's heavy.
It really is, and again, sometimes we simply don't understand the importance of the teacher or the faculty member that's inside the classroom. That it has both short-term and long-term impacts on whether someone finishes their academic journey. And although again, sometimes this can be a very difficult conversation. When I talk about 5% or so of faculty at a university lives the Black experience, sometimes what we really have a difficult time talking about is sometimes those faculty members aren't Black American faculty members. Some of those faculty members are from the continent of Africa, and there is a clash of culture that takes place because Black students aren't simply just Black Americans going to a university. You have a global Black diaspora that goes into a university. So there are cultural nuances that take place. But the only thing that is clear from kindergarten through a PhD level education is that no matter what setting a Black male or a Black boy find themselves in, they are the burden of study. Everyone directs their attention at them because, the television, some skewed data, everything presents Black males as this beast, and everyone wants to see the show. And just, again, imagine being placed in that setting your entire academic career, where you're the guinea pig, you're the research instrument. Everyone is pointing their methodology at you, trying to figure out what you're going to say, what you're not going to say. It becomes a challenge just to live in that life.
Martin, what do you think, man? That was some heavy data. That study's from 2016, but I doubt if it's changed any much when you still see Black boys targeted, being seen as a threat, but before they're even old enough to really have cognizance.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I do, one of the many things I do, is work in restorative justice. And I work with teachers and educators. So I talk to them every week around the things that are happening in their classrooms and creating alternatives for punishment. Restorative justice is a field that derives from indigenous peacemaking practices that teaches people ways to find alternatives for punishment by creating communities where everyone can thrive and feel valued. So one of the things that we do is we talk about what happens when they're concerned about behavior. And I know, as somebody that's facilitating the space, that a lot of that concern is going to lean towards black boys, young boys of color. So we talk about ways to identify what are the patterns in suspensions and expulsions in school, and we show them what it looks like, because oftentimes when people are faced with the conversation, it's hard for them to hold because everybody thinks that it's not them. But I say when you navigate the impact of Black men and boys and think about how the school to prison pipeline is impacting us, moving all the way from the bottom all the way up, it doesn't just benefit us. It also impacts Indigenous men too, because a lot of their numbers are very similar to ours. But because there's a significant amount of us that are hyper visible, I think really leaning into this is important for all of the racialized men that have to deal with these sort of carceral focuses that will happen to us. So yeah, it's heavy. It's very heavy.
All right.
And very, very quickly, imagine the mental health trauma that a Black boy or a Black man goes through 16 or 12 to 14 to 16 years of their educational journey, that you can never be yourself. That is, you're always making your voice softer. You're making sure that you're not as physical because you may offend someone. I mean, just think about that narrative, that throughout your educational journey, you never have time to discover who you really are, that you're always in theater mode, that you're always acting for someone. And listen, we know the data. Most teachers are white females. And listen, this plays into the stereotype. So here you are, a young Black boy, you have a white female teacher, that the stereotype says that you're the person that's going to be going to prison. So I've got to calm this beast down. I want you to speak quieter. I don't want you to make hand gestures. And for God's sakes, don't touch anyone, because sexual assault is right under what Black males are supposed to be everywhere. So again, it's the mental health trauma that you have to deal with. And all this doesn't happen at the home. This happens in the educational setting. And so just think about that. And we all get it. If we're going to use data that says that someone who finishes a college degree can make, I don't know, $1.5 million more in their lifetime, just imagine the turmoil that you're going to have to go through to get that money. And again, never allowing time to be yourself in a setting that you're going to spend at least 14 to 15 years of your life. It places a tremendous burden. And we're asking ourselves, really, in almost a serious tone, why Black men and boys aren't looking forward to going to college when they know most of them are like, I'm happy, finally, I can learn to be myself. I don't have to play this role in order to make the person standing in front of me happy.
I want to pull up one more slide real quick so we can talk about this. This is from the article, the New York Times article that started all this conversation. And I just want to put this up real quick. Howard is not unique. The number of Black men attending four-year colleges has plummeted across the board. And nowhere is this deficit more pronounced in historically Black colleges and universities. Black men account for 26% of the students at HBCUs, down from an already low 38% in 1976, according to the American Institute for Boys and Men. That's, like I said at the top of the show, that's a heavy number. And I want to ask both of you, because you do work in these fields and you work with Black boys. Is there anything that we can do to kind of like at least make space for Black boys going into college to feel comfortable, or at least create another pipeline and bring them into the academy where they can feel affirmed in any way? Is that possible? Dr. Tony, that's
yeah. Very quickly, again, if you're a Black male and you're at a university, you're a de facto mentor, and I hate to put it that way. You cannot hide on campus. It is an impossibility. When Black students see you, and specifically, I'm at a primary white institution. When Black students see your face, it's an amazing thing to see. They most go through their entire academic journey never having a Black university professor. I mean, That's almost silly to describe it in that fashion. You know, said another way, it's almost like seeing a unicorn when you see a Black faculty member on a primary white institution. And so you're placed into a position of mentorship, but this is where it becomes dangerous. Not every Black faculty member wants to be or can be a mentor for Black students. That's a very difficult thing to understand and acknowledge, because listen, there's not a PhD course on being a Black mentor. There's no such thing. You're thrown into this world of elitism where everyone thinks they're smarter. Everyone in the building thinks they're smarter. And so the idea is that you have to prove to students that you're smarter than them. And when you're one of the 5%, sometimes you're placed under tremendous pressure to police Black students. And again, this is the unique world of being a Black faculty member, that sometimes white faculty members will look at Black faculty members and say, why are they acting in this way? And having a serious conversation. That's the level of elitism and uncomfortability that takes place sometimes.
Martin, I want to ask you this because another offshoot of this conversation has been the conversation around Black male studies. For some of y'all who may not know, Black male studies was basically the study of Black men and their epistemology, pioneered by Dr. Tommy J. Curry. Do you think there's a space for Black male studies to maybe like counteract some of these narratives and counteract some of this negativity that Black boys are facing in the academy? I know some people who, as Dr. Tony Gaskew said, a lot of the people who have an issue with Black men in general, they also have an issue with data, and they also have an issue with citations. So I'm just wondering, is there a space in there for that?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely space for it, but you know, I have to name this a paradigm shift. Like, and it's never been kind to people. People aren't kind to that because it changes their money, especially if you build a career off of certain theories and positions. It's going to be hard, and as it relates to Black men and the way that victimization is framed, a lot of those theories are very dogmatic and ideological, and even just thinking about the nature of just race being contested even now with the attacks on BEI. So then you bring in conversation that really uses data to validate the high levels of oppression that come onto racialized men, specifically Black men. Yeah, it's tough and it's rough. And that's why I'm out here doing these sort of conversations, because I see part of my role as an advocate for Black male studies is to make it translatable to the social studies and the mental health piece, or rather the public health positions, that we can think about how can the average person adapt and make room for the impacts that are happening to Black men and be creative around this. Because like I said before, it's going to be tough. And one of the things, going back to your earlier point, you're talking about young Black boys being able to have a track into the higher education. When I was younger, I was in upward bound programs. They took us to Howard. They took us to a few other HBCUs and schools. So I knew that it was possible to see. I knew what it looked like. And at this point, you know, my kid is 14. We've already gone to HBCU because I'm like, I have to show you this first before you go see anything else, to see what's possible. Now, I don't want to, there is a level of class in the conversation around advancement where there are folks who are like poor, like a lot of Black people are poor and will really struggle no matter how gifted they are to get the opportunity to get there. But I think it's important to show people that it's possible. And then we'll work on the other parts as we come to them.
Dr. Tony, I want to throw this question at you because Black male studies has made significant inroads in the psyches of Black boys and Black men. It's one of the first disciplines out of the academy that's been since the 70s that kind of grew from a popular groundswell outside of the academy to start to move into the academy. And you're starting to see some pushback from that because, again, like I said, a lot of the preconceived ideas about Black men that are able to thrive in the academy come out of I hate to say this, but just come out of vibes and whatever I feel that day, and they're not basing any kind of empirical data, to the point where people literally hiss at you like Dracula showing them a cross if you show them empirical data. That's how crazy this thing got. So, I mean, do you think there's room for Black male studies to maybe make inroads into the academy, to create a lane for Black boys to have a space, just like every other group has been able to move into the academic space because from their curriculums?
You know, listen, that's a great question. First of all, Tommy Curry is one of the most brilliant scholars I've ever run into in my life. And listen, Tommy is so brilliant. He goes beyond race. You know, arguably the best debater that I have academic debater I've ever seen in my life. So I know academians who run from him. If they see Tommy Curry's name anywhere, they're going to the opposite direction. But having said that, well, yeah, there's room. There's always room. But I think, as my distinguished colleague has already said, research is about money in the academy, and it's never about truth. And I think we have to be very careful about this. Truth is who's paying you who's funding the research, is what truth is in the academy. So Black male studies, in order to really have a standing in the academy, there has to be funding. There has to be donors. Tommy's doing fantastic work, but he's doing that work internationally. And it's one thing doing that work internationally. It's another thing doing that work domestically at universities. But it needs an infusion of money. And again, as I stated at the start of this, look, the Ford Foundation has put in over $500 million into gender studies and Black studies. So I want to be very, very careful with that. And this is what we have. So if you have the money, you're going to create your own data. And that data doesn't have to be truthful. It just has to push the agenda of whoever the researcher is. Right now, we simply don't have that type of money in Black male studies. Now, there's fantastic scholars out there, but there's simply not enough to push that agenda. And number two, look, if you're going to have a long career in academia, you're going to have to secure tenure. Securing tenure is like swimming through a pool that has great white sharks in it. And if their ideological agenda doesn't coincide with yours, then it's going to be very difficult to sustain a career in the academy. So having young scholars, junior scholars come into the academy, it's a tough time for them. It's a very difficult time. And if they put Black male studies on their CV, look, if it doesn't match the agenda of their program director, of their chair, of their dean, it's a tough haul. But there's hope, but there has to be an infusion of money.
Gotcha. Martin, let me ask you, do you think that because of the climate in the country right now, especially on academic campuses, and some of the climate just in general with the zeitgeist and the cultural things that are floating around in the country, do you think there's a possibility for Black men to maybe make a resurgence, even whether in the academy or even outside the academy, and ended up becoming sort of like maybe mentors before you even get to the point of getting into an academic space? Do you think that's important as well? Because every Black man isn't going to go to college. And to be honest, I personally believe that every Black man is suited for college, not by dint of their intelligence. They may have talents in other areas. Look, I know brothers who barely graduated high school who have their own businesses and the locksmiths and got 4 or 5 houses. And I know people who have PhDs that are doing lattes right now. I'm just saying it's real relative. You know what I mean? You may have prestige, but it's very relative. So do you think there's a place for that too?
Yeah, I think it's a place for social networks of mentorship. Because mentorship doesn't have to move from the oldest to the youngest. Like, we can move it across sectors and across ages, where people can build the sort of networks that allow us to share skill. Because I think I want to be careful, because I know there's a particular thought amongst Black people that we're not going to get better until it gets harder. But it's always been hard. Hundreds and hundreds of years of moving past slavery to create all of the amazing, beautiful things that we've done so far, and we'll continue to do those things. But I think the thing that's needed in this moment is, I think, more voices like this talking about it. The reason why I focus so much on identifying the philosophical underpinnings of so, like, let me actually rewind a little bit. When you talked about people are allergic to data, like, yes, and there's a philosophical undergirding of why they look at data a certain way when it comes to Black men, because they see it as a focus on lived experience, and you can't trust the systems to be able to talk in relationship to marginalization that is framed through a feminine lens. It's important for people to know that, and then for I say older, I'm like younger, oldish. I'm not young no more in that way. But when I'm talking to younger folks, or even folks that may be a little older, I'm translating. I'm like, this is how they're talking about us. Here's how you have to think. Here's the sort of connections that you need to make, and the language that you have to use to get by, because they're looking at us as violent and hostile. And if we're threatening their idea of what it means to be a victim, because most of the time people think of victim and gender lens. Me coming in and saying that I have it harder is upsetting their paradigm. So I had to figure out how to get what I need, make sure my family gets what we need, make sure that other Black men and boys get what they need, and make sure we like this. The conversation is happening. So yes, there are opportunities for transference of knowledge and mentorship and all of that, but we have to be creative, because the internet and technology is spinning too. Like, that's going to keep changing. Repression is going to keep happening. So my duty as a Black man in relation to my other Black men, like, I feel like I am my brother's keeper. Like, I have to reach out to you and see how you're doing, and you see how I'm doing, and build those sort of connections so we can make sure that everybody's okay.
All right. Final thoughts, man. Is there a way to fix this? Do you have it? If you could reach into your bags and pull out a one sentence or one paragraph remedy for the way Black men are treated in the academy, what would that sound like? I'll throw this to Dr. Tony.
That's probably the $64,000 question. Look, the academy is about money. It's about economics. It's about billion-dollar endowments. It's you simply can't look past that. Of course, the academy is about ideology and feelings as well, and it's about personal agendas. Look, I do the absolute best that I can do as a Black male. First and foremost, mentoring and being there for my own son. I think that's where it has to start. It has to start at home. And I know that sounds so, pragmatically conservative, that the ideal Black male is the mentor of his children. That's the first thing. I've never allowed a university or any setting to control the tempo of my own family. That's number one. And again, my background and my experience, that's what led me into this. But fixing the academy, look, you have to force your way in. What the Black Liberation Army used the term expropriation. Listen, you're as a Black male, you have to learn to expropriate every single resource and don't look back. And of course, okay, being very careful, quoting the great Mr. Woodson, don't not go back. Listen, I can't. Being a professor at the University of Pittsburgh, listen, if I'm Dr. Gaskew on my tombstone, I have failed as a Black male. You have to give back to where you're from, no matter what. Not saying that economics and capitalism, we're all getting paid somewhere, somehow. So I want to be careful with this. But not being able to take time to give back, that to me is the key to solving this.
All right, Martin, your bag of solutions on this.
Yeah, my solution to most things is getting rid of prisons. I think you do that, then a lot of this stuff goes away because free labor is slavery, literally. So that's one thing I think of. But we need people need resources. I think we talk about opportunity a lot. I mean, we need resources. We need money. We need to be able uh, to fund our ability to have varied interests as we move higher in whatever profession we choose. Uh, and college may not be the path every Black man takes. I actually encourage them to look at the wide array of things that you can do and figure out what's going to make you happy and where the opportunities are. But for the ones that do want to do that, I think we have to try to secure the money and the funding for them. I think we need to start thinking now. This is my organizer hat now, because this money that will be going to the young folks to get to college is not going to be there for at least the next 4 years. He going for more too. So we have to really think about that in a real serious way. This ain't philosophy. I mean, seriously, think about what's going to happen to our kids and the people that come after us. So that's what I got when I think about
Yeah, and well, all I can say is I think there needs to be a complete overhaul of what we consider education in general. I mean, I think there's this idea amongst a lot of Black people that education means you have to go into that building, get a degree, and then that's where your education stops. And I think we have to stop thinking that way. And I also think we have to get out of this idea of thinking that just because somebody does have that or does have that on their wall, then that means you're automatically better than somebody else. Because look, it's going to take people who are hands-on workers. It's going to take blue-collar people. It's going to take intellectuals and academics and all these people to come together. Because, as you said, the way things are going, and I don't want to get into this too long because I feel like this. I think somebody like a Trump or somebody like it's sort of like a lazy excuse to fall back on. But the country has been heading this way for a long time. And Black people are going to have to come back home at some point because the way it's going, you're not going to have a choice. So you're going to have to find your people wherever they are. That's just my thought. But thank you so much, brothers, for coming on. Y'all, it's been an hour. I wanted to try to keep it tight for an hour, and I want to put a pin in it here. I want to thank you, brothers, so much for coming through. Dr. Tony Gaskew, Martin Henson. Thank you so much, brothers. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Always. And thank y'all for coming through and check out the show. Thank you for taking time out of your Thursday evening to listen to three brothers chop it up about Black academia and Black scholarship and Black boys being absent from class. Again, my name is Torrin Walker. Y'all be safe. Y'all have a good evening and have a good Friday.